All right, everybody. We are doing a little bit of a late night Perceptive podcast here on the Game Wisdom channel, but we have another. Well, actually, we have two developers on tonight to discuss their current project. They are working on the modern retro RPG Lawless Legends, and we're going to be discussing the game as well as some of the design of it. So, please welcome to the cast Martin and Seth. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Yeah.
It is great to have you guys on. I was speaking with, I think it was Mark from, was it 6502, who's working on, I always forget the name of his game.
Knox.
Yes. And,
Not Arcadist.
yeah. And he suggested for you two to come on, as we've been talking to a lot of like modern retro developers lately, and it's always great to kind of see what is going on in that space and kind of talk about what it's like to make a game like that today, because it's certainly a different take than what we see from a lot of kind of more obviously modern style titles. So I guess to begin with, since this is both of your first times on, could you kind of give a little introduction about who you are and what is like your background when it comes to game dev and such?
You want to go first, Martin?
Sure. I'm Martin Hay. I am a programmer by trade and have been a programmer even before I had a trade since I was 13 with my Apple II Plus. So that's how I got started playing games. I always wanted to make a game and had many false starts over the years. Um, the first game I actually made was about 10 years ago, and it was a really cheesy, terrible game, but a lot of people loved it, called Structress. And but my real passion was to make an RPG, and Seth came along and said, I want to make an RPG, and I need somebody who can program an Apple II. And so that's how I got into the project. So kind of my perspective is I bring a modern professional programmer mindset and education and experience to this ancient computer platform that I love. And the intersection of those two streams I find really interesting.
All right. And you, Seth?
Uh, I'm a musician. I'm one half of the band called 8-Bit Weapon, and we do music for video games, TV shows, films, and we primarily use old pieces of computer hardware or video game consoles. We use their internal sound chips as our instruments. So we have either custom-made software or commercially made available software that lets you use a Commodore 64 or an Apple II or a Game Boy or an NES, Atari 2600, Amiga, whatever. And we use those, the sound chips in each as our sound palette in our music. But we also do traditional music as well when someone requests it, when we do work for hire. My wife, Michelle, has a solo spin-off known as Compute Her. That's her in a Game Boy. So when she wants to do something without me tinkering with it, she does Compute Her. But that's what we do, and I've always been a huge fan of computer role-playing games, starting with my first real computer role-playing game was Bard's Tale 2 for the Commodore 64, and then on to Bard's Tale 3 and Dragon Wars and Wasteland. And I played all those games, and I've played all their successors to this day. And I've always loved the 8-bit CRPGs best, and I always find myself going back and exploring those further to try and see if I can wring out more information or another experience I didn't find the first 50,000 times I went through. And I do find things here and there, but it's pretty bone dry. So I figured, well, I'm going to have to make one if I want a new computer role-playing game experience for a Commodore 64 or an Apple II. And strangely enough, the Apple II community is dwarfed by the Commodore 64 community as far as coders go. But as far as collaborative interest goes, there's almost none in the Commodore 64 scene that I experienced. Only in the Apple II scene did I see people with open arms and willing to try things on and see if they wanted to participate or not.
Mm-hmm.
Myself and Martin do the lion's share of the work, but we have to mention Brendan Robert, who did a huge editing suite called Outlaw that lets us edit the entire game, or lets me, a non-coder, edit the game in something called Blockly. So Martin does the actual heavy lifting as far as the 6502 assembly. Brendan did a dash of that for the 2D map engine. And I did all the graphics for Lawless Legends, the story, the scenarios, the overall design, I would say, is probably 75% mine, and then everybody kind of chipped in on top of that. And now, even though we may or may not put Mockingbird music in the game, I've got an 18-track score already recorded that can, when we release the game for the emulator that Brendan Robert also made, that is probably the best pixel perfect version of an Apple II I've ever seen. It'll have music coded into it that will trigger at different times in the game. But it's pre-recorded music, and it's not true Apple II or even Mockingbird music. So that's my part in the game development.
Okay.
And miss anything, Martin?
There's a couple other collaborators to mention.
Oh, right.
Andrew Hogan did a font engine. Dave Schmink contributed the music engine if we end up using it, and the Plasma language, which we use quite extensively, actually.
In the combat system, right?
Where 6502 isn't needed. The combat system you and I did.
Okay, I thought he had put it together in Plasma or something.
I don't remember that.
Okay.
All right, great. And it's always interesting to talk about like video game music. I had a previous guest, Jonas Turner, who does a lot of music for indie developers, and it's always great to talk to somebody else who kind of works in that space. I guess for people watching us either live or recorded, what is, I guess, like the Cliff's Notes version of what Lawless Legends is as an RPG?
Lawless Legends is set towards the tail end of the California Gold Rush in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And tensions are high. People shoot each other over the drop of a hat or a grain of gold dust. And it's a classic role-playing game, kind of like Wizardry or Bard's Tale, Wasteland, Pool of Radiance kind of game, where you have a combination of overhead tile-based travel for the world map, and then when you go into cities or mines or forts, then it goes to true 3D rendered graphics using the raycasting engine that Martin built, with sprites that he created. Or I did the graphics, but he created the ability to have the sprites in it. And what you do is you're dumped in the California Wild West in 1856, and you're going to go take over for your dad, who's going to be retiring as sheriff in the town of Grub Gulch. And then you find out soon that the welcome wagon isn't going to show up, and you got to find out why.
Cool. In terms of, like, I guess, like combat with it, like I've spoken with Mark from Nox Arcades. I spoke to the developer of Scold, which is another kind of modern retro Apple II style RPG. For Lawless Legends, what kind of, like, I guess, like combat is in this game?
So when you fight baddies in this game, you see your 1 to 3 characters in your party. You start as a character that you create from scratch, but then anybody else in your party is going to be an NPC. You have the initial option to run away or fight, and then you got to roll to see if you actually make it off unscathed. If you get into the actual combat, you have melee weapons, ranged weapons. There's some steampunk elements to some of the weapons and armor. And so you can advance in increments of 5 feet. Each of the 3 characters get to choose if they dodge, attack. They can choose a melee weapon. They can choose their projectile weapon if they have it equipped. And there's also some light explosives at play in the game too. But what you see is a portrait of the closest monster, animated, and then you see blow by blow of what's happening in combat in the text window,
Mm-hmm.
and you go round by round until the combat's over. You're dead.
Yeah, and I should mention that because it's in the Old West, there's an emphasis on guns and gunplay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually takes me to the next question I have for both of you. Typically, when we talk about, modern retro RPGs or just classic RPGs, they are mostly fantasy related. Ultima, wizardry, Might and Magic, and so on. What kind of inspired you guys to go with the Old West as the theme for this one?
Well, it's because I don't believe anybody's done an actual Wild West RPG for a classic computer. The only Wild West RPG I've ever heard of is Red Dead Redemption for modern systems. But I just thought it'd be cool to do a Wild West RPG with a little bit of fantasy tucked in there. But yeah, nobody had really done it, and in a lot of games like Fallout and Wasteland, they're kind of westerns in a way, even though it's irradiated.
Mm-hmm. Anything you want to add more about that?
I love the Fallout games. I do want to also add the engine itself is meant to run lots of different kinds of games, and in fact, early on we released a tech demo called what was it, Ancient Legends, right?
Ancient Legends,
which is much more fantasy based, right? Just to prove that the engine could do, a totally different game than Lawless Legends. So, Brendan's part of making this whole editor, and my part designing the underlying Apple II code that reads the files that come out of that editor. That's all kind of, as generic as we can make it, or not as generic, as powerful as we can make it, so that it can handle a wide range of games. But Lawless Legends is really the shining star and the driving force behind all of the features that we add to that engine. But we do hope in future that other games will be possible with this engine as well.
Yeah, because the Outlaw editor that Brendan made, you can download it right now and make your own game today. There's a learning curve for it, but over the last 8 years of my use and playtesting of Outlaw, we've included a lot of smoothing out features that will make it easier to get in and create your own game. But Ancient Legends showed that the 3D engine worked, the 2D engine worked, the saving and loading of maps and items and everything that is the core of the game worked. Lawless Legends is way more complicated and has so much more depth than Ancient Legends that it took, we released Ancient Legends in 2016. We're just now putting the finishing touches on Lawless Legends in 21, and we expect to release it in hopefully July of this year.
Okay. And just to clarify for people watching, with the development of Lawless Legends, was this done using, like I said, is your engine meant to emulate the Apple II, or did you actually work with the Apple II when designing the game?
It will run on an Apple II,
Okay.
but Brendan Robert made his own Jace Apple II emulator that we'll be using for the PC and Mac ports. They'll just be running Jace and doing the audio playback that I mentioned. Otherwise, you'll get actual floppy disks or disk images to use on your virtual disk drive on a real Apple II computer.
Right. It was very important to me to make it run on an actual Apple II computer. And we went back and forth, what the specs for that computer should be. We ended up, it's got to be a 2E and it's got to have 128K, which was by far the most common Apple II model.
Yeah.
And is also emulated by ones after that.
I use a 2C and it runs fine on the 2C.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From a development perspective, though, we don't use the Apple II itself to develop the game. Everything's done on PCs and Macs and cross-compiled to the Apple II, and then we run the game, usually inside an emulator.
Okay. So, I guess to build off of that, with coming up with the design of Lawless Legends and kind of working, using your own engine and then making sure it can run on the Apple II, were there any aspects that were like particularly challenging that you had to kind of like, maybe there was a constraint with working with this that you had to get around?
I'll let you go first, Martin. I got one when you're done.
There were so many constraints, which I think is lovely. Constraints are great for really amping up your creativity. Seth would come to me and say, I want to do this. Can we do this? And I'll be like, oh my God, that's going to take so many cycles. And then, we figure out a way to do it, by taking shortcuts and by, well, what if we just, hack it, basically, to eliminate 90% of your features, but keep the core thing that you really, really needed.
Yeah.
We could probably do that. And so, we can get into the details of the graphics, which are quite limiting on the Apple II, and I think Seth's going to talk about that. But also in terms of space and speed, we did a lot of work to make it fast, fast enough that you could play it on an Apple II with that disk drive that, reads at 20K a second, maybe? No, a lot less than that, actually. Anyway. And also, it's got to take somewhere less than 100 disks to, right? So the current build fits on 8 floppy sides, so 4 disks double-sided. So that was huge. We added compression. Nobody back in the day did compression, but that's, of course, modern programmers are compressing things all the time. So, of course, we had to have compression. All right. We found that the operating system was just so bloated and using up so much space, and we used almost none of it. So we found a lovely replacement that some other people in the Apple II community had written called ProRWTS that's just tiny and does only what we need and no more, and is a quarter of the size of ProDOS. So, having those constraints led to a lot of interesting decision making, but also led, I think, to us having a lot of fun. I love counting cycles in assembly language code, and like, it's 32 cycles. Can I make it 31? I love doing that stuff. It's the kind of stuff I don't get to do in my day job because modern computers, just throw another gig at it. Who cares? What do you got, Seth?
The things that came to mind was, remember when we first started playtesting? I started playtesting on my 2C, and it would only show the low bit graphics, and we had to figure out what it.
Ah, yes, I remember
because
that.
the Apple II has high bit and low bit. It's a total of 6 colors, and you can't have them touch each other. And there was something in the Apple IIc that when I played it would only display the low bit graphics, which is green and purple, black and white, and none of the orange and blue high black and white. Which the black and white, even though I say black and white, those are 2 blacks and 2 whites that are different from each other if you see it on the screen, because the edges have different colors. Anyhow, that was a fun bug. The other thing was I kept hounding Martin for specific colored squares on the 3D map ground. Like, I wanted water, so I wanted blue squares in specific spots. But that would be kind of a nightmare to have a specific blue or any color square when the whole ground is just one color field. So we got around that with sprites. I came up with an idea where I would double up 2 squares worth of sprites in a row that are animated, so when you were looking at it in 3D, it looked like running water. And when you walk through it, you can't see it because you're above it.
Ah, so clever.
And then Martin, we had a geek out camp night at my house a couple years back where we finally added animation to the graphics, and that's where some of the compression came in. where you have a picture, a portrait of a monster, and it only kept what was different about the other frames, right?
Yeah, so that you could fit a reasonable amount of animation on a disk.
Yeah.
And in memory, too. Memory is another very tight constraint on the Apple II. And I'm sure Mark talked about this, but, you know, we're constantly juggling stuff in the background. Like, okay, we've got to do combat, so we've got to throw out everything else and load the combat engine. Okay, we're doing combat. Oh, we got to play the death animation. Better get that in memory. Better throw something else out. So there's a pretty sophisticated memory manager. Brendan started it. He started the idea of it, and I kind of finished the whole implementation on the Apple II. That takes care of moving things in and out of memory in the background. You know, there's a whole garbage collection system which is not built into the programming language to recycle memory at the soonest possible moment. So everything fits, and it's a fun juggling act for a programmer in the background. The player has no idea and should never have an idea. All the torture that I went through to get everything to fit.
Yeah, it's like going to Disneyland. It's a seamless experience where you don't notice anything you shouldn't notice while playing the game.
And that's something that I know when I spoke with Mark about, with Knox, about, again, like all the challenges and limitations that come with this. And one of the more, I think, fascinating ones was talking about the design. And this is something I want to ask both of you about. That obviously for you guys and for the people watching this live and recorded, game design has come a very long way since the Apple II was out. And part of the challenge that when I speak to developers working on these modern retro games is trying to figure out, I guess, where to draw the line between, being a retro style game and making something for somebody who didn't grow up playing the Apple II, who can enjoy. And I want to get both of your thoughts on where does, I guess, Lawless Legends lie in that? Like, is this a game that is, pure and fully for old school CRPG fans, or did you think about anything for people who didn't grow up trying to get in this game?
For sure, there's a lot of stuff. I think Seth's going to talk about stuff too. A few things popped into my mind. One is, modern role-playing gamers, including myself, expect there to be a map.
Mm-hmm.
They don't expect to get out their graph paper and start plotting the squares. They expect, just be able to hit a button and get a map. And that map should tell you where you've been and where you haven't been. It should have symbols on it so you can find your way around. If you're on a quest, it should tell you which way to go. Old school RPGs did not do that stuff.
No, they did
No
not.
hand-holding.
Mm-hmm.
No hand-holding. This game is made for modern RPG players like myself who want that stuff and count on that stuff. And really, I got a kid to raise. I don't have time to be getting out the graph paper. Sorry. That's just not me anymore. So that's one area that I think is very modern and would feel, well, probably old school players would have liked it to today, but they would have been like, whoa, that's totally new and different. The other one that strikes me is when you're creating a character in this game, we ask the gender of the character, and we're like, oh my god, what should we do? I don't think we can have it just be male or female. So we're like, well, we can't blow a ton of memory on this problem either because it's not a big component of the game. There's a couple times we're going to use this information. So we ended up just keeping it simple. When you're asked for a gender, you just get to type a letter. Any letter you want. That's what we did.
Problem solved.
Problem solved.
Are they allowed to use numbers, Martin? Can they be a number?
I don't remember. I have to check the code.
Okay. You should add that.
I'm not a number.
I'm number one.
There you go.
The things that came to my mind, Martin mentioned quest log and the auto map. features, which
Oh yeah, the quest
everybody
log too,
needs.
that's right.
And part of it was born out of my father-in-law does playtesting for us occasionally, and if I can keep his interest, it's going to be a great game. And the thing that stopped him early was, where's the map? Where's the auto map? Where am I going? Because he plays modern games. So I have to keep him interested, and that was one of the inspirations. The other thing is, this is a story-driven game, so it's not about grinding like you would with Wizardry or Bard's Tale, where you got to kill a billion rats and then a couple 100,000 goblins, and then you can level up, and then now you can go to the next dungeon. You can go anywhere you want in this game, but there's a good chance you can get your rear end handed to you if you go in the wrong area too soon.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really not a grinder. It's about the story and the experience and playing through. Because I know there's gamers of all ages and all interests and all attention spans. So we wanted to make a game that anybody could sit down and play and pick up and put down with ease. If you want to sit down and hammer through it, there's lots to explore. So it's not an easy game to get through the whole thing, because the world is huge. We made a really big world on this Apple II. If you go just the core story start to finish, you could probably do that. I don't even know how many hours it would take, but far less hours than looking under every rock and in every mine in the game.
All right.
I like giving people the choice.
Yeah.
And my friend in chat wants to know, can you enter in a race? Can you decide, are there different races in Lawless Legends?
You will see different races depicted. We tried to include as many different ethnic graphics as we could in a little amount of space, but you can be whatever race you want to be, but it's just not going to be listed in the game as a stat.
Hopefully that answers the question there, Shark. Now, with kind of about the minimap, that's a big one for me as fans watching. When I play a game, I need that map. I need to be able to see where I'm at all times, or things go horribly awry for me in these kinds of games.
Well, we also, not only do you have an auto map feature, but in the quest log, you can say, show me on the map where to go next for the next step in my quest, and it'll actually do that, which blew my mind that we could do that on the Apple II. I thought the best thing we were going to get is the auto map, but now you can actually have it tell you where to go if you don't want to spend hours and hours trying to figure it out yourself. So that was a big plus. Plus, on top of all of that, when you buy the actual physical copy of the game, you'll get a nice Wild West style paper map like they did, in the mining days. As well as a number of other feelies that will be coming with it.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of any other games or any other kind of old school RPGs that did that with having the map actually be updated with the quests.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else's does that specifically, but that was another necessity for my father-in-law. So.
Yeah. And it was challenging from a technical perspective because our we have a lot of maps. The world map is big. It takes a lot of bits to store all that stuff. So you can't actually fit the whole auto map in memory either. So that has to be written to disk and has to be juggled in and out. So
yeah, I think the viewer for the 2D map when you're playing is, I think, what is it, 9x9 tiles, Martin?
Right.
And the map itself is actually 128 by 128 tiles.
Yeah. So it's definitely on the bigger side for that.
And that's just the wilderness. There's all the places in the wilderness to see.
Right. Yeah. Going indoors, going in mines, going in towns, all that stuff.
Going on trains.
Well, on trains.
Yeah.
Oh, and the graphics. Seth was, I think, Seth did most. Oh, go ahead. Did you have another question?
I was just going to ask, in terms of, I guess, the story itself. You said that the game is very much going to be story driven. Are there multiple paths through it, different endings, or is it just one tale?
There's currently one ending, but there's countless ways to get there. You can kill almost everybody you meet in the game, all the shopkeepers, the sheriffs, the bankers, everybody can die. There's only a few people that you can't kill, because we can't. You can't kill them, not because it has something to do with the story. It would be wrong to kill these people in the game.
But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy on you if you kill all the bankers and the sheriffs.
Oh yeah,
and so
no.
on.
There's serious consequences for everything in the game. So if you walk into somebody's villa and you start shooting things up, don't expect to get out alive easily.
I guess one question I want to ask you, you kind of mentioned this a few minutes ago, but you guys have been working on this game for, you said, I think about 8 years now?
Yeah, this is year 9.
Ooh.
21.
I guess, where did the original concept for it come from? You can remember, that far back.
I remember it like yesterday. I was sitting, I think I was playing, maybe it was one of these 3 games, Dragon Wars, Bard's Tale, or Wasteland. And I was just thinking, God, I love this game. All of those games I've played on Apple II, Commodore 64, and PC, except for Bard's Tale 3, because that was actually developed by somebody other than Interplay, and it wasn't so hot for the PC. But Interplay developed Bard's Tale 1 and 2 for all those platforms, and Bard's Tale 3 they only developed for Apple II and Commodore 64. But anyway, I was thinking, how am I going to get this experience again unless I create the game? Because I love the graphics, because the low resolution and the limited colors requires a symbiance of your imagination and the game. You fill in the blanks where the pixels can't give you that detail, or when you're walking down the corridor and you're only seeing this pseudo 3D view and you can't see around the corners.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the inspiration came for me, is I wanted more of this stuff, because I literally played these games over and over again, and I needed a new fix. I needed something fresh, but the only way it was going to happen is if I made it myself. It's like when you love a kind of food, and the only way you're going to make it better is to make it yourself.
Okay.
But and for me, I've written a number of game engines over the years, and I've never finished one. I've always wanted to finish one, but the big stumbling block for me is I am absolutely no good at scenario. I just can't come up with a coherent plot and all of the characters and interactions. I love other people's scenarios, but I cannot do it myself. So that's why it was kind of a wonderful thing when Seth approached me, because it's this perfect meshing of talents. But honestly, this project would not have come to fruition if Seth hadn't kept pushing it forward. He's a very determined guy. And part of it has been, it's not like we've been full-time on this for 8 years.
No.
We all have families, we all have jobs. We're doing this for fun, and we're doing it for the love of it.
Yeah.
So when it gets to be not fun, we're not doing it.
Yeah. And that's something we come up against, is like, because I'll always go to Martin, hey, can we get this done by X or whatever? And then Martin might be like, I don't know, that's kind of stressful trying to do that. I said, well, we didn't do a Kickstarter, so there's no deadline in reality. I'm just saying, can we do this? And that's been a huge relief, because we talked about doing Kickstarters like our buddies, but then you've got that clock ticking over your head to get it out and to spec, what you promised in the Kickstarter, it better be there. So it's just less stress to just go at our speed, do what we want to do, because we always come up with innovations and changes, and let's do this. And Martin always thinks of things like, I'll say, what do you think of this scenario? Does this make sense? He goes, yeah, but does a cat really want to eat a dog? Or does the dog want to eat the cat? Kind of a scenario. And I'll be like, I didn't think of that. So we do a lot of morning video chats where we'll like, okay, I need to talk to you about this. I need 15 minutes of your time undisturbed. I have a question for you. And then a month or two will go by and we only talk via text or whatever, but we always reconnect with some sort of video conference.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly just us two, but occasionally Brendan, and then very rarely Dave Schmenk.
Okay. I was about to ask you guys as well if you went on Kickstarter or not, because like you said, I know Mark did. I'm pretty sure the other Skull did as well, and it has been a very popular option for getting these passion projects off the ground.
Yeah, and it's a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
You get funded if people believe in your idea, but then I can't tell you how many people I've invested in that either they didn't turn up or it took them 10 years, it feels like, to deliver something. Like I put in $50 into the two guys from Andromeda, not Space Quest game back in 2012, and I just now in September got a beta to test. Even Wasteland 2 was delayed by about a year, I want to say, but
Mm-hmm.
they did deliver. So I don't want it. I don't want that pressure, and I don't want Martin to have that pressure. And like he said, we're doing it for the fun. We're not expecting to make money on this. We're not going with a big publisher for it. We're working with Rebecca Heineman and Old School, her publishing company. If you're are you familiar with Rebecca Heineman?
Name sounds familiar, but
Let me go down the list.
mm-hmm.
She helped code part of Bard's Tale 1 and 2, but did all of Bard's Tale 3, part of Wasteland, all of Dragon Wars, tons of games. She's done Game Boy games. I think she helped with Out of This World. If you look at her credentials on Moby Games or other sites, it's just a huge list of things she's accomplished in her career. And it's because of her and her games that inspired me, that we became friends. I reached out to her and we talked, and we actually met at a Classic Gaming Expo. And she actually played in my band briefly for a song where, I don't know if you're familiar with the Commodore 64, has a sound chip called the SID chip that actually it was designed to be kind of like a an ARP Odyssey on a chip, which is a synthesizer from the 70s. And you can actually adjust the resonance filter with a Pong paddle. So we gave her the Pong paddle while we played the Commodore Live. But anyhow, we've become very close friends since then. That was 10 years ago. Geez, now that I think about it. So I showed her some early versions of Lawless Legends, and she loved it. She hasn't released a role-playing game in years that was hers, and having her be a part of this is just a dream come true, for me at least. And she's a wealth of knowledge, both for anything related to computer software, packaging, coding if you want it, and release dates, what you should have, what you shouldn't have. It's great to have her as kind of like a female Obi-Wan Kenobi when it comes to game development and publishing.
Yeah, she's fun too.
Yeah, a lot of fun. And the other thing that we actually did recently, because we a portion of the game involves Native Americans, and so we got a Native peoples consultant to work with on the game, because something I noticed when I was doing research was that a lot of Native peoples do a lot of articles about how nobody consults them about how to have a Native American in a game. So we thought we would correct that problem by consulting with someone who knows a lot about Native peoples. So that's something that is going to be unique about the game, is the representation of a completely fictional nation of people will be more accurately represented than probably other games have.
Yep, and that's definitely an interesting point, especially when we look at games that try to take place in either realistic or, contemporary settings, some of the
Yeah.
challenges of trying to work that in.
Yeah. These days, there's a lot of sensitive subjects to navigate through, and we didn't want to release this game and have any nation offended that we had borrowed or appropriated something intentionally or unintentionally. So we had our consultant go over all the text in the game, all the graphics, to make sure there was nothing offensive, and we've achieved that. There was actually very little that needed to be changed in the game, luckily. So,
So, keep with that line of thought for a second. While developing Lawless Legends, were there any aspects of it that you had to cut for one reason or another, whether from a technical standpoint or just like a game design standpoint that it just wasn't working with the rest of your game?
From a technical standpoint, I think there's several graphical features that Seth would really have loved to see on the 3D maps, like textured grounds, or at least colored ground, mountains in the background, things like that. And boy, that code is so difficult and so memory consumptive, and some of those features did not make it in. I'm still very proud of the 3D engine, 2.5D engine, but it's it's definitely got its limitations, because when you've got a budget of 1 million cycles and you're trying to achieve 10 frames a second, that's only 100,000 cycles, and when you're trying to draw 10,000 pixels, that's 10 cycles a pixel, and boy,
it adds up.
That's tight. That's really tight.
Well, we managed to cheat most of what we wanted anyway.
Yeah. I don't know, from a scenario perspective, is there stuff that you had to leave out because of limitations or because of time? I think you put in everything because I don't think you've let time be a constraint.
No, time was not a constraint. I don't think there's anything I don't think there's anything missing. There's only a few things at this point Martin's going to code that have to do with character stats and how they affect the game. That's all that's left to code. And we're going to be giving out free copies of there's 7 disc sides, I should say, so 4 discs to the game. It requires 2 disk drives for a real Apple II. And we're going to give 3 of the discs away for free soon for people to play test. And if you actually pre-order the game, if it all goes well, you'll actually be able to play it on your Mac or PC with the Jace emulator. And then when the actual game's released, there'll be an upgraded version of that emulator that includes the music we talked about that's coded into the Jace emulator to be triggered at certain times. We're still trying to see if we can fit actual Apple II Mockingbird support for key portions of the game, but we're not wedded to that.
Okay.
But as far as things I wanted in the game, I got everything I wanted and actually more. Yeah, I can't think of anything that I couldn't fit into the game story-wise or graphics-wise or even items material-wise. It's all in there. The only thing that, we're going to save for the sequel is maybe figuring out a way to do that, the overall background graphic of the mountain range, if that's even possible. I don't necessarily need the specific,
sure.
Yeah, or the specific square of the ground being a specific color. But those are the only 2 things that I asked for and didn't get. But I don't really need them because I've cheated away around both of those problems.
Cheating is good.
Yeah, lots of cheats. And there's lots of secrets in the game because of the cheats. To play test the game, because I've play tested more than anybody, you get tired of doing certain things over and over again for the 100th time, so I put in a lot of secrets to shortcuts throughout the game for players to discover.
I guess a pair of questions about kind of like the legacy that you guys are working with Lawless Legends. As we've said a few minutes ago, with kind of spending a lot of time designing this for more modern audiences, And this is a question that I asked Mark about as well with Nox Arceus. That with like I guess the older fan base, the people who grew up with the Apple II and looking to play on like that kind of system, have you got any reception from them about kind of like the changes, or if it's it hits like right at that sweet spot of nostalgia? Is there anything like they didn't want to see? Like, were there any I guess conflicts with like your vision and what they wanted out of a old school CRPG?
So far, not one negative thing has come across for like, this is stupid, or I don't like that, or why did you do that? The only thing that I've encountered this whole time is I posted pictures of the game about May of 2020 and an Apple II group on Facebook, and there were some challengers saying, this is BS. I want to see video. So I showed them video, and they shut up. It's real 3D graphics rendered in real time, where with Bard's Tale, Dragon Wars, it's pre-rendered bits that are all kind of put together on the screen in real time, but you can't look wherever you want like virtual reality. Now keep in mind, you can't look at pixel by pixel moving left to right. There's 16 points that you can face in the game and move, where normally you just have up, down, left, right, forward, backward, that kind of movement. But the engine Martin made is incredible. The trade-off is some speed in the highest resolution of walking mode, where you can go in 16 directions. But there's 2 different travel modes that are faster at the cost of seeing all the directions or being able to travel in any direction you want out of the 16. It goes 16, 8, 4. 4 is the classic mode, which everybody knows from Wizardry and stuff, and Ultima dungeons and stuff like that.
Okay. And I guess the other one, or the other part I want to ask, with again like working on this on your spare time and going about like that, what was like the decision like to really like go all in on kind of nostalgia, like the physical side of things? So I know when I spoke with Mark, like he definitely spoke highly of having as much like physical goods with Nox Arcade as he could.
Speaking from my own experience, I've got most of my original games that I had when I was a teenager, and I love, like, I'll show you things like this. Here's Deathlord, which is kind of like Ultima in Japan, and it's got a little map on the inside, and you got your little diskettes. And I loved reading all this stuff because there's like story here, and then here's who made the game, and then inside they actually included a simple paper map to use to show you, where you're going in the game. And I would, when I'm not playing the game as a teenager, I would look at this and study the map and think, okay, tomorrow I want to go check out this island and this castle and blah, blah, blah. And you could, strategize when not playing the game, or at school when you're supposed to be studying. So
Yeah,
I
I've always loved
wanted
the game with feelies.
Yeah.
I always loved the feelies of Infocom games, and I just don't see how we could release a physical game without feelies.
Yeah, why go this far and not add the feelies? It's expected,
I guess it is a very, thinking about it now, it's a very retro thing to do. Very few modern games have any kind of a feelie.
Yeah, you
I
gotta
was super surprised when I got my copy of The Witcher and it came with a map. I'm like, wow, when's the last time that happened?
Yeah, well, I paid, $130 for Fallout New Vegas to come with dice, some chips, and some playing cards.
Yeah, I spent $100 or so from the Diablo 3 collection to get a big book.
And that stuff, like a book, is what you would normally get with a game in the old days, So we want everybody to enjoy it. We want, the younger generation to be able to sit down and play it and not have to worry about getting the book out. Because when you play the emulated version, there's something that we built called storybook mode, which is so you go into a town and then you see the villain. And one of 2 things will happen. If you're playing on the Apple II, it'll say, It'll show you an animated portrait of the villain, and then it'll say, read Black Bart's got his gun pointed right at your head. Read log 5, and then so you go pick up the logbook and you go see what logbook 5 says, and you read it in detail. But if you're playing the emulation on a PC or a Mac, it changes the whole screen to have the animated portrait and then the full screen of text explaining what was in the logbook. So you don't have to dig it out. So the younger, newer gamers or the people that just don't have time to do the old school stuff, they'll get the full experience. But if you really want to dig in and go old school, you can.
Yeah. And again, like we could certainly go on like a little rant about physical like bonus goods and stuff in games. I'm sure. I was just thinking about Sam and Max the other night from Telltale, and they had like their physical releases, and they had like all these like little knickknacks that came with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sierra was good about that too. You know, Sierra Online with their games later on. I think one of the first ones, like Space Quest, came with coupons for Droids R Us, that because Jeffrey sued them, had to be changed to Droids Be Us. And Legion
No way.
had the cocktail napkin, you know? And it's hard to find. I a few years back went out of my way to find an original Leisure Suit Larry with the real cocktail napkin still in perfect condition. It's just a cocktail napkin. That's the only thing special that they threw in as a feeling. So yeah, it's important to the old school gamers for sure. And Nox really upped the ante because they knocked it out of the park with their feelings.
Yeah, for sure.
Mark sent me a complimentary copy, and he will be getting a complimentary copy of ours. And when I opened it, it was just like, without even playing the game, you just get this rush of like, oh, this is so cool. It's got a map, and it's got a little gem, and the crazy thing is got this little sealed envelope that's, got the wax seal on it. I don't even want to open it because it's going to ruin it, but then I can't know what it says.
I know. When we did our interview with Mark, he went like Home Shopping Network for like 5 minutes, just showing everything he had nearby.
It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So now, Becky and Janelle are making the box artwork. Janelle's made a beautiful paper map that looks like it's from the Wild West. I can't wait to show it on our Facebook page and on our Twitter account. The Lawless Legends Tin Star will be one of the feelies. You can see that now. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple other surprises we'll have in the box as well for the hardcore collectors.
All right.
I really want the Tin Star because I have a Disneyland Sheriff hat, and it's just got a perfect place right at the front for that Tin Star.
Perfect.
Nice. Well, there's your Halloween costume then for next year. If we we have Halloween next year.
Speaking of which, all of the developers are in the game as animated portraits for different things. Martin is a villain in the game. A crazy villain.
I love my portrait.
He looks nuts in it.
Seth is an outlaw coming out of an outhouse.
Nice.
And my wife's in it too, as a bartender too.
Yep.
And Brendan is a frothy, crazed. I won't say exactly what he is, but he is not looking well in his portrait. Dave Schmenk had an MRI of his head that I converted into something gruesome. So they're all in there, animated for your enjoyment.
Well, that's definitely a tease right there. There's a great start conversation. I took an MRI on my friend's head, and it's in the game somewhere.
Yeah, it is. It's actually on his Facebook. I don't know if he still uses it as his Facebook profile picture, but it's pretty gruesome.
There we go. Speaking about the art, it actually took me to a few other questions I want to ask both of you about. And that is definitely the pixel art for the game. I guess, who did the art for Lawless Legends?
I did every pixel in the game by hand.
How was it working with pixel art, by the way, Seth?
You know, it surprised me. I had talked to a few friends that I know from the game development world and the retro gaming world, people that do graphics on Commodores and whatnot, and they wanted to help, but they also wanted a hefty fee. That I have no budget. This is not a budget game. There's no Kickstarter, so I took a crack at it. And what I did was I found a ton of images from the 1800s that I could convert to rudimentary shapes on the Apple II, and then I would fill out all the features. I just need to know where the head was and where one of the eyes were and how that relates to the body. So it looked really awful what I started with. You wouldn't recognize it other than a human shape or a creature shape, but then I would cut out all the background, and this is all in Outlaw, so this is all in Apple II graphics that I'm doing this. I would fill in the actual shape of the life form, I'll say, and then the face, and then lots of dithering graphics. You'll notice in all the artwork there's lots of dithering. I love dithering to give more dimension, some light and shadow. There's some great play of light and shadow in some of the animations.
Yeah.
I've got this guy with a half-eaten hillbilly with a shotgun that you see light from behind him and you kind of see his body, but when he blasts his shotgun, you see how bloodied up he is in the front from the shotgun light. And it's all in, Apple II 6-color graphics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at
He did not pay any attention to the limitations of Apple II graphics. Like it was like, so you should probably alternate lines. You should have high bit graphics on the even lines and low bit graphics on the odd lines. And like, just puts anything anywhere. If it looks good, that's the only gauge. And he's done stuff I didn't think you could.
Yeah, more cheating.
The portraits just look great.
Thank you. Yeah, the thing with Apple II graphics is you can't have the high and low touching, or they will flip each other over. So if you've got a purple right here and you slap an orange right here, it'll flip this over to orange.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very fine line. And the way you can fudge it is to have outlines of things in black or white, because both high and low have black and white. So that's my secret. But I turned out I am an artist, a graphic artist that I didn't even know existed, and I love doing it now. I do it for people. I did my father-in-law and my mother-in-law for Ancient Legends. They're the king and queen in the game, and they're kind of like the focal point of the story. I converted them to Apple II graphics. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's a great challenge. I like challenges. That's kind of what got me into chip music to begin with, is the limitations. I started making music on Game Boy using a software called Little Sound DJ that turns your Game Boy into a music production studio using the 4 audio channels that are built into it. But obviously it's very limited sound-wise, but with a lot of experience in tinkering, you can actually crank out some unbelievable sounds out of, I think it's a 4-bit audio output out of the Game Boy, even though the CPU is 8-bit.
Nice. And I was looking at a few of the screenshots you sent over, and like the one with the sick mountain lion, like you can see I'm not sure there's like blood or some kind of like disease all over his face. Looks really nice.
Yeah, that one was a lot of fun. Because sometimes art demands blood. That one, I didn't know what to do with his face. There was so much detail I needed to fill in, and I go, you know what? Maybe he just ate somebody, and it's just all bloody, and that way I don't have to fill in all the details of a cat's mouth, because there's a lot of detail there already. But I just thought, wow, it really would like freak players out to see this cat that's just mauled something before it met you.
Yeah.
There's some nicer looking cats in there too. They're not all scary.
And for anyone watching, and you pet any of those cats and dogs.
Yeah, don't feed the animals or anything you meet in the game.
Yeah,
that's part of the story that you touched on. He is a sick cat. There's something unnatural happening deep in the wilderness that you have to discover the source of.
I guess one question I forgot to ask when we were talking about the gameplay of Lawless Legends, with the actual like combat and with like character growth, how are you guys approaching that in terms of like, do characters gain new skills? Is like combat, weapon or equipment based, or is it more like skill based or a combination thereof?
It's a combination. You got to have the right skill. You can use any weapon, but you're not going to hit anything with it without the proper skill. And you will find new skills that you didn't know existed later in the game. The characters, as you level up, get points that you can apply to either skills or attributes. So you can put in a point to agility and a point to hand-to-hand. Okay. And when you get NPCs,
always put a point on handguns.
Yeah, agility and handguns are very important. And NPCs, when you add them to your party to help customize them, you are given a number of points to personalize right away. Because that's one thing I always didn't like when I got an NPC is like, okay, I got to wait till he levels up. Because I know what is important in the game as a player, not just in Lawless Legends, but in other games. But you don't get to tweak them as much, You don't get to